Good evening, everyone. This week's Parsha is Parshas Kisavai, Tavshin Pei. We're going to start from the beginning of the Parsha, which is Perek Chav Vav, Pasuk Aleph, chapter 26, verse 1. V'haya kisavai ha'aretz, and it shall be when you come to the land, Asher Hashem Elokecha nosen lecha nachla, that Hashem your God is giving to you as a inherited portion. V'yirishta v'yashavta ba, you will take possession of it, and you shall dwell in it. Rashi comments that the point of these last words, where it says, and you will take possession of it and live in it, is that the mitzvah we're about to learn about only applies in Eretz Yisrael and only starts after the land has been conquered and divided amongst all the tribes. You shall take from the first of all the fruit of your land, that you shall bring forth from your land, that Hashem your God gives you, you shall place it in a basket. You shall go to the place that Hashem your God has chosen, to dwell his name there. This mitzvah of taking the first fruit that your land brings forth, and you put it in a basket and you bring it to the Beis HaMikdash, is the mitzvah we call Bikurim, which is the mitzvah to take the first ripened fruits, and they are not permitted to be eaten. They have to be taken to the Beis HaMikdash, and as we see, they will be given to the Kohen. And Rashi points out that the wording of the pasuk is, you shall take from the first of all the fruits of your land. From the first implies, but not all. And Rashi tells us, is based on the Gemara, the mitzvah Bikurim only applies by the Shivas Haminim. Actually, it's a Mishnah in the tractate of Bikurim in Mishnayos. It only applies to the fruits, to the Shivas Haminim, the 7 species of produce that Eretz Yisrael is praised for in the Torah, which is chita, se'ora, wheat, and barley, and all the other grains that are considered derivatives of them. Geffen, figs, pomegranates, dates, and olives. Those are the 7 species of produce that Bikurim is taken from. Rashi also comments that the way it's done, that one separates Bikurim, is a person goes down into his field, he sees, for instance, a fig that has ripened, he takes something like Rashi describes like a soft reed, or we would call it a string, and you tie it around that first fruit, and you say, Harei Bikurim, this is Bikurim. That's how you designate what's going to be Bikurim. Okay. And the pasuk says, what you designate, you take, you put it in a basket, and you bring it to the place where Hashem will decide to dwell his name, meaning to the Beis HaMikdash. Pasuk Gimel, verse 3, Uvasala kayen asher yeh bayamim hahem. You shall come to the Kohen that will be in those days. V'amarta elav, and say to him, Higarti hayom Hashem Elokecha. I tell, or I declare today to Hashem your God, Ki vasi el haaretz, I have come to the land, asher nishba Hashem la'avoseinu l'ses lanu, that Hashem has sworn to our forefathers to give to us. So this is the declaration that he makes, basically expressing the recognition and the gratitude for the land of Israel that God promised to give to Abraham and to Yitzchak, that he promised to Abbas to give the land to their descendants, and this is what's happened. And then the Torah says, the Kohen will then take the basket from your hand, and place it before the altar of Hashem your God. These fruits are not offered as a sacrifice. They are brought to the Beis HaMikdash. They are put down in front of the altar. And then the Torah describes a declaration of thanksgiving that this person, that the farmer, brings. It says, as he brings the Bikurim, in which basically, again, it's a summary, a short synopsis of the history of the Jewish people, being in Egypt, being enslaved, being freed, and then being brought to the land of Israel, and being able now to bring these fruits, these first fruits, as a act of gratitude to Hashem for giving the Jewish people the land of Israel and its produce. Now, we're going to focus on Pasuk Gimel, verse 3. And the very first words of that pasuk, the first few words of that pasuk, rather. Uvasala kohen, you're going to come to the kohen, Ashiyah b'yamim hahem, that will be in those days. Now, what do those words mean, the kohen that will be in those days? You're going to come to the kohen from the past? There's only one kohen to go to, the kohen that's there in those days. So what is the Torah trying to bring out with these words, the kohen that will be in those days? So Rashi comments, the only kohen you have is the kohen that you have in your time. Meaning, if you're going to be complaining or wondering and saying to yourself, the Kohanim aren't as spiritually good as they used to be, and you're going to kind of be disappointed or bothered by that. So the Torah says, you bring to the kohen that will be in those days. Rashi explains, the only kohen that you have, the only kohen that you should be focused on is the focus that's there in your days. So if you're kind of grumbling over the fact that the Kohanim just aren't like the way they used to be, the Torah is saying that is irrelevant here, and you work with the kohen that you have. Now the Ramban, Nachmanides, questions this explanation that Rashi gives, because we do find a similar comment when it comes to the Torah describing how you may have a question that has to go to the highest rabbis or the highest judges. And there the Torah talks about going to the judge that will be in those days. And there Rashi comments the same idea, that if you're going to start grumbling over the fact that the rabbis, the judges aren't like the way they used to be, they're on that same level, not the same level of greatness that they were until in the past, that's not something to be focused on. You work with the judge, the rabbi that you have in that time. The Ramban says that makes sense. You have a question, and it's a question that deals with Torah scholarship, and you talk about, and you remember how they used to be such greater scholars in the past. So why are we asking these scholars now? They don't know as much. Hashem says, you ask your questions to the scholars of that time. But it makes sense to have to say it. You might think that these people who aren't scholarly, aren't at the same level of scholars, they're not worthy of answering the questions. The answer is no. The Torah says they still are. But what difference does it have to do with a Kohen, says the Ramban? When it comes to a Kohen, at the end of the day, a Kohen, when it comes to what we give to a Kohen, whether it's a sacrifice that he offers, whether it's Bikurim that we give him, or the Truma that we gives him, what's the difference if he's not like what the Kohanim used to be before? He's a Kohen. He is the one that the mitzvah is done with. And therefore, what difference does it make? Is he as great as the Kohanim before, not as great as the Kohanim before? That's the Ramban's question on Rashi. So the Ramban himself, when he learns, he has two explanations for these words when it says the Kohen that will be in those days. The first explanation he gives is, you give the basket to the Kohen that will be there in those days. They are given to the people of the Mishmar like all sacrifices. Not you bring a Kohen along from your city to give him the Bikurim. Meaning, in the Beis HaMikdash, where the sacrifices were given, there were 24 divisions of Kohanim that served in the Beis HaMikdash 2 weeks a year. And the Mishmar, they were called a Mishmar. Each group is called a Mishmar. So the Mishmar that was present in that week, then when that was present and offering the sacrifices for that week, those were the Kohanim that got whatever those were the Kohanim who got what Kohanim get from the sacrifices, because it's their week. It's their week to be there, and therefore they are the ones who get what the Kohanim get from the sacrifices. So here by Bikurim, which is not really a sacrifice, the Torah is saying, according to the Ramban, that when you give the basket to a Kohen, you don't bring a Kohen along with you. You have a Kohen, he's a friend, he's your neighbor, and you're going to bring him to give him the Bikurim. No. The Kohen, you give it, you'll come to the Kohen that will be in those days. Doesn't mean in those days historically. It means the one who will be serving in the Beis HaMikdash. The Kohen who's part of the Mishpah, part of the group that is serving in the Beis HaMikdash that week, that is the Kohen that you go to give the Bikurim. That's how the Ramban learns. Then he brings another explanation from the Sifri. The Sifri is form of medrash. It's a halachic medrash. And the Sifri explains that the point of the words that you will come to the Kohen that will be in those days actually means to say the following. Let's say there was a Kohen who was serving the Beis HaMikdash, and everybody assumed that he was we'll call it a kosher Kohen. And then we find out that he's not. We find out, or he finds out, somebody finds out, it all kind of becomes known. He himself didn't know it. It becomes known that his mother is a divorcee. A Kohen is not allowed to marry a woman who's divorced. So if a Kohen marries a woman who's divorced and they have a child together, the child is not a Kohen, although typically the children follow the father, and a boy who's born from a Kohen is a Kohen. In this case, since the Kohen had this child with a woman he wasn't allowed to be married to, then this child is not a Kohen, it's called a Cholol. Cholol means he's been defiled from the kahuna. So let's say you had a case of a Kohen that was serving in the Beis HaMikdash, and now it became known that he was a Cholol, which means that whatever he was doing until now, one would say, well, that means that he wasn't supposed to be doing what he was supposed to be doing. He wasn't supposed to be serving in the Beis HaMikdash. So what happens to everything that he did until now? So the Sifri says that here, when the Torah says by Bikurim, you'll come to the Kohen that will be in those days, that means to say, you'll come to the Kohen of those days. If in those days he was thought to be a Kohen, then your coming to him is a good coming. The Bikurim that you did with him is fulfilled, and it's done. Basically, a Cholol who accepts Bikurim, even though he wasn't supposed to, but he did it because he didn't know he was a Cholol. Nobody knew he was a Cholol. It works. It works. It's still considered that it was done. It's kosher. It's done. You don't have to do it again. So that's how the Ramban learns. That's Ramban cites the Sifri that derives from the words the Kohen that will be in those days to teach us that if he was a Kohen in those days, he was assumed to be a Kohen in those days, he's the one that you can go to. That he's the one that if you went to him, it works. You fulfill the mitzvah through him. The commentator of the Chassam Sofer asks on this explanation that actually, and the Ramban himself cites a Gemara in Kedushin that actually tells us that if the same case would happen regarding sacrifices that this person brought, he was a Kohen, and he thought he was a Kohen, he brought sacrifices, and then it was found that he was a Cholol. If he was a Cholol, then he wasn't allowed to bring any of those sacrifices until now. So does that mean that all the sacrifices that he did now were no good, and everybody's got to go in and do everything over again for as long as he was doing the service in the Beis HaMikdash? So the Gemara cites a pasuk, a verse in the Torah, Baruch Hashem Cheloi, Hashem blesses his army, Ufayal Yodav Tirtza, and the acts of his hands he accepts. That's the source to say that if a person was a Cholol, he didn't know it was a Cholol, he thought he was a Kohen, and he brought sacrifices, the sacrifices are accepted. You don't have to, the people who had him perform the sacrifices don't have to do it over again. They don't have to do it over again. You know, if you find that he was never a Kohen, everybody thought he was a Kohen, he wasn't a Kohen, doesn't work. But basically, he was born from a Kohen. We thought he was a Kohen. It's really a Cholol. The verse tells us that the karbanis, the sacrifice that he brought, are accepted. So therefore, the Chassam Sofer asks on this explanation, why do we need another source to say this for Bikurim? If we know by actual sacrifices that if he was a Cholol, he didn't know he was a Cholol, but he was the one who brought these sacrifices. He did the offering of the sacrifices, a Kohen does. That accounts that it works. So why wouldn't they be able to derive Bikurim from there? That if the Kohen who took your Bikurim and you did the Bikurim with him, and you gave the Bikurim to him, it comes out that he was a Cholol, right? We should say, okay, it works, just like we know by the Karbanis. Why do we need another source by Bikurim to say that if someone who was a Cholol, we didn't know he was a Cholol, he was the one you gave the Bikurim to, that it still counts, you still fulfilled your mitzvah. So the Chassam Sofer explains in a very interesting way. He says there is a difference, though. It would be possible to say that a Cholol's sacrifice could be accepted more than the Bikurim that he takes. And that's because, in essence, when we deal with a sacrifice, what is the main point of a sacrifice? The main point of a sacrifice is the blood that's sprinkled, the parts that are offered. The Kohen's job is just to perform that. He performs those services. He performs that ritual. But the main point is that the blood should be sprinkled, the parts of the animal should be sacrificed, and he's the one who does it. But by Bikurim, there's nothing more by the Bikurim other than it goes to him. That's what you do with Bikurim. You do nothing more than give it to the Kohen. Sure, there's a declaration that you make, but what you do with the Bikurim is you give it to the Kohen. In essence, the Kohen is the one who's taking it in place of Hashem. But the point is, you're giving it to the Kohen. That is the carbon. That is what you're doing here. That's how you perform the mitzvah Bikurim. The same way by a sacrifice, you perform it, but you bring it, and the Kohen now sprinkles the blood, puts the parts of the body that have to be offered. So now, what do you do by Bikurim? What is it that you do by Bikurim? You give it to the Kohen. That's the mitzvah. You give it to the Kohen. Well, if the whole mitzvah is giving to the Kohen, and the Kohen was a chalal, he really wasn't a kosher Kohen, I would have thought that maybe it doesn't work. By a sacrifice, the end of the day is the main parts were offered. The blood was offered. The body parts were offered. Okay, so what was done by a person wasn't supposed to do it. It was done by a chalal. But he's just, so to speak, he's the one who's performing what needs to be done for the sacrifice to be considered offered and accepted. But here, the whole thing that's done is you give it to the Kohen. So one might have thought that if he's really not a kosher Kohen, it won't work at all, because that's all there is, giving it to the Kohen. We would have thought, therefore, that kind of situation we can't derive from the law of sacrifices. Therefore, the Torah to give us another source that even by Bikurim, where the whole mitzvah is given to the Kohen, even though it landed up he was a chalal, he wasn't allowed to be doing any service as a Kohen. Nonetheless, the Bikurim are accepted. The mitzvah was done. Okay. So now we have to try to figure out to explain Rashi. The Ramban seemingly has a very strong question on Rashi. What difference should it make what level the Kohen is on? Whether he is as great as the previous Kohanim, not as great, what's that got to do with the fact that you give Bikurim to a Kohen? A Kohen's a Kohen. Why should there be a difference in what level he is spiritually? So the commentator of Sefornu gives his explanation to these words, the Kohen that will be in those days. And this is the way to understand Rashi also. The Sefornu says, on these words, and you will come to the Kohen that will be in those days, even though he is not great in wisdom, you should still speak respectfully with him when you say Hashem your God. Let's look again back in Pasuk Gimel. Pasuk Gimel reads, you shall come to the Kohen that will be in those days, and you'll say to him, I declare today to Hashem your God. Now, what do you mean Hashem your God? He's everybody's God. But actually, if you speak to someone and you refer to Hashem as Hashem your God, you mean to say that you have a very special relationship with God. That's what those words mean when you're addressing an individual. Now, to say that an individual, that Hashem your God, that you have that kind of relationship with Hashem, that we can say Hashem your God, that has to be a person at a very high level, very high spiritual level. So now you're saying those words to this Kohen, and you look at this Kohen, and he's the Kohen, but there's nothing much else about him. He's not that wise. He's not that great. There's nothing that prestigious about him that he should deserve that wording to be used for him. That's Hashem your God. Although that kind of wording is only used for kings and prophets, only for people of very high stature, nonetheless, even though this Kohen doesn't reach that level, being that when you bring him the Bikurim, it's like you're giving the gift to God, who is the master of the land. It is only befitting to speak to him in the most honorable way. Being that Bikurim, when you're bringing Bikurim, says Sephorah, what are you doing? It's really a gift back to God. God is the master of the ground. God is the one who gave you the land. He's the one who allowed your land to produce what it produced. And in gratitude, you bring him a gift. But how do you give God the gift? You give it through the Kohen. The Kohen is Hashem's representative to accept the gift. If that's what he is, then no matter what level he's at, as long as he's a kosher Kohen, he deserves to be spoken to with the highest level of respect. Even though personally he's not there, but being that he is the one representing Hashem to accept this gift, therefore he is deserving. You speak with him. It's only proper that you speak with him with the highest level of honor, because he's representing Hashem. So therefore, that's the same idea that Rashi's saying. One might think, not that if he's not on the same level of Kohanim from previous generations, I don't give him the Bikurim. But the wording that the Torah tells me to use, I might be hesitant. I might think that he's not deserving of that wording. The Torah says, even so, you use that wording. He may himself personally not be worthy of that kind of wording, but you still say it to him. Why do you still say it to him? Says Seforno, because of the fact that he is representing God and accepting this gift that you're giving back to God for the good that he gave you. You now have to speak with this Kohen with the utmost level of respect. So that would be a way of answering Rashi. I'm going to share with you one more explanation here from the Chassam Sofer. Chassam Sofer, Moshe Sofer, he has his approach to this pasuk and to what it means, again, what it means the Kohen in those days. He'll have a different explanation for Rashi. He has another question. His other question is that the Pasuk Gimel reads, you shall come to the Kohen that will be in those days, and you shall say to him, I declare today before Hashem your God. The Chassam Sofer says, what is the point of these words? I tell today, I declare today before Hashem your God. That's what you're doing. You don't have to say, I tell today. You get up and start telling. You get up and start talking. Why does the person say, I say today to Hashem your God? You should find a way of saying. You should say to him, why does he have to say the words, I tell today? He should just say, I say to Hashem your God, I have come to the land. What's I declare today. What is the point of those words? Okay, this is what he's doing. Perhaps to be more clear, maybe the bigger question is perhaps on the word Hayom. He's supposed to be coming to say, the person is supposed to be declaring, thanking Hashem for being given the land. That's what he's supposed to do. That idea can be brought out without having to say the words, I tell today. Of course, you're telling today, that's what you're doing. So there is a more simpler way of being able to say that I declared, that I say to Hashem, I acknowledge that I've come to the land, I received the land. Why this? I tell today to Hashem your God. Of course you're telling today. What other day are you saying it? Another question that the Chassam Sofer points out, interestingly, is that when we look at the Psukim, for instance, that Pasuk Beis verse 2, it says, you'll go to the place that Hashem, your God, will rest his name. Who's the your God there? Your God means you, the one bringing the Bikurim. Then, when you talk to the Kohen, you refer to it as Hashem, your God, meaning the God of the Kohen. And then, the rest of the Psukim, whenever it says Hashem, your God, it's Hashem, your God going on you. Why here, when you address the Kohen, is there this focus on Hashem, your God? What is the point of that? So the Chassam Sofer learns like this, that in essence, when we thank Hashem, this person in this verse, what is he? He didn't say anything about his fruits yet. All he says is, I say to Hashem that I have come to the land that Hashem has sworn to our forefathers to give us. It's a declaration of thanking Hashem for the land of Israel. That's what it is. That's what it is. Now, there's really two aspects of the thanking that this person is giving. One thing is to thank Hashem for the land of Israel. If the land of Israel was a barren desert, it still would have been a special land because it is the Eretz HaKadosh. It is the Holy Land. It's a land that's been designated as the place for Hashem's presence to dwell, the place that has the greatest connection to Hashem. That's Eretz Yisrael. It's always been that way. That's how it was created. And it could have been the most difficult and barren land. But because it's the Holy Land, and that was given to us, we would need to thank Hashem just for that. Happens to be that the land of Israel is a beautiful land, flowing with milk and honey, and that's another thing to thank Hashem for. So says Chassam Sefer that what this person here is doing is the following. He's walking to Beis HaMikdash, he's got this basket of fruit. Before he gives this basket of fruit to the Kohen, he makes a declaration. He says he thanks Hashem for the land. By doing that before he gives the basket of fruit to the Kohen, he's trying to make it clear that this thanks that I'm giving right now is not about the fruit. It's about the land, no matter what it would have been. And therefore, he holds onto that basket. He says the first verse. After that, he gives it to the Kohen when he goes and he thanks for the fruit. But the first thing he's giving thanks for is the land, a land that no matter how barren it would have been, we would have thanked Hashem for it. It would have been worth leaving Egypt just for that. So the words he got to tell him, I declare today, really means to say that what I'm saying right now is a declaration that has nothing to do with this basket. He got to tell you, today I'm telling. That's all I'm doing here. I am just talking about the land. I am thanking Hashem for the land. No matter what kind of land this would have been, since it's the Holy Land, I thank Hashem for that. Then I'm going to give the basket of fruit to the Kohen, and I'm going to thank Hashem for the additional blessing of the fact that he gave us a land that produces these beautiful and wonderful fruits. But there's two things that's happening here. We're thanking Hashem for the land, no matter what kind of land it would have been, because it is the Holy Land, and then for the fruits produced from the land. Okay? Therefore, being that this verse that we just read, Pasuk Gimel, is thanking Hashem for the land, and we're not thanking Hashem for something physical. We're thanking Hashem for the holiness of the land of Israel he's given us, because we're thanking Hashem for the land, even if it would have been barren. So it's not about the land, the physical land per se. The physical land could have been horrible, but it's because of the holiness that's there. Being that we're talking, the first pasuk is thanking Hashem for the holiness of Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, says the Chassam Sefer the following. When a person gives praise and thanks for the sanctity of the land, that he has sanctified us with his commandments, that's what we're doing. When it comes to sanctity, the Kohen is at the forefront. It is through him that holiness flows to the Jewish people. The reason why, at this point, we start talking to the Kohen, Hashem, your God, is because, again, we're focusing on the Kohen's unique relationship with Hashem that every Kohen inherently has. And it's through him that the sanctity flows to the Jewish people. Through him bringing the sacrifices, that sanctity that we are blessed with, the sanctity of Eretz that we're blessed with, we receive that sanctity through his actions. He's the conduit for that sanctity. And therefore, we say, therefore, the pasuk says, I declare today that I have come to the land. I declare today to Hashem, your God. When I'm declaring today, when I'm thanking for the sanctity, I'm thanking Hashem, your God. I'm thanking for the sanctity that you are the conduit for, that comes about through you. Therefore, it's at this point that we focus not on Hashem, our God, but Hashem, your God. Because we're talking specifically about sanctity, and the Kohen is the conduit for sanctity to the Jewish people. Says Chassam Sefer that one might think, well, if this Kohen isn't much to talk about, or if, let's say, I know a lot more than him on a much higher spiritual level than him, maybe he's even somewhat ignorant, so he's the conduit for sanctity. I should be the conduit for sanctity. or he's going to be a conduit of sanctity for me. I'm on a much higher level than him. Just not even bragging, just be a fact. You know who you are. You know who you are. You can see what he is, and therefore you might think that this is not the guy that should really be the conduit for sanctity, and therefore again, I shouldn't be saying to him, Hashem, your God. He doesn't deserve this. It may be something that's going through your mind. Go through your mind. He doesn't deserve that title. He doesn't deserve that kind of description. Hashem, your God. He's the conduit for sanctity. That's what will be going through your mind. Says Hashem, you will come to the Kohen of that day. At the end of the day, no matter who this Kohen is, even if he's not like the Kohenim used to be, nonetheless, Hashem has chosen him. Hashem has made him the tzinar, the conduit for the flow of every holy matter. The Kohen is the conduit, no matter who he is. As long as he's a kosher Kohen, he is the conduit. That is what a Kohen inherently is. So if you're thinking in your mind, he's going to be the conduit for sanctity, that I should be saying to him, Hashem, your God, the answer is yes. Don't question saying those words to him, because he is a Kohen. As a Kohen, he is the conduit, as the Chassam Sofer says. He is Tzinar v'Shefa. He is the pipe, the conduit, and source of flow for every for every matter of holiness. And therefore, no matter who he is, you can say those words, Hashem, your God. Okay, so that is the Chassam Sofer's explanation here on these words of Ashiyah B'Yamim Ha'im. So we had Rashi's explanation, which is again we have Rashi's explanation that Ashiyah B'Yamim Ha'im means you give it to come to the Kohen who will be in those days, no matter who he is. You work with the Kohen you have. Why would I think otherwise? So in Rashi, the explanation is I wouldn't think otherwise when it comes to actually bringing Bikurim, but my question or my doubts or my grumblings may be, why would I say the words Hashem Elokecha on him if he's not such a great person? And the Sephorinu says, the Torah is telling us nonetheless you do, because being that he is Hashem's representative to receive the gift for Hashem, therefore he deserves to be spoken to in the highest level. According to Chassam Sofer, the explanation in Rashi would be that he deserves those words because at the end of the day, no matter who he is, if he's a Kohen, he is inherently the conduit for the flow of sanctity to the Jewish people. Have a wonderful evening.